everyone. Good evening. Welcome to our webinar. Maybe we'll start in a few minutes. We'll just wait for everyone to trickle on in. We have a very exciting evening for everyone. We're going to give a presentation, some findings about a recent youth AAPI report, as well as share in on a panel with amazing panelists tonight. Can everyone see my screen? Excellent. Okay. We'll wait just one more minute just to respect everyone's time. I know it's pretty late for those on the East Coast. We appreciate everyone for being here tonight. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. It is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month and Mental Health Awareness Month. Welcome to tonight's webinar called Beyond the Surface, where the UCA Waves and the Asian American Foundation partner together to present a recent groundbreaking AAPI Youth Mental Health Report. We're so excited to share these findings with you and also share a panel discussion with some amazing panelists who have done incredible work in the Asian American and Pacific Islander space. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. Tonight you have two hosts. We have Dr. Jennifer Tu, who is a third-year psychiatry resident based out of the University of California, Los Angeles. And also me, I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner in psychiatry and also mental health, and I am based at the University of California, San Francisco. And we have our amazing moderator for tonight, Dr. Justin Chen, who is the Vice Chair of Ambulatory Services, as well as Vice Chair of Health Justice and Associate Professor in the Department of Psychiatry at New York Presbyterian Hospital and Cornell Medicine. His interests include innovative approaches for improving access to psychiatric services, mental health disparities, and cross-cultural psychiatry. He identifies as a second-generation Asian American as the child of immigrants from Taiwan. Next, we have Shruti Chandrasekaran. Shruti is currently employed as the Director of Data and Research at the Asian American Foundation since October 2022. Prior to this, they worked as a senior associate research scientist. Their expertise and experience in research and data analysis make them a valuable asset in various professional settings. Shruti then pursued a master's in science and comparative social policy from the University of Oxford in 2011 to 2012. Next, we have Phineas Wong, who is a counseling psychology PhD student at Arizona State University. His main interests include examining the intersection between racial, ethnic, and gender identities, associated risk and protective factors, and related mental health and psychosocial outcomes. He is particularly interested in understanding how Asian, trans, and non-binary youth and youth adults navigate, negotiate, and communicate their identities with their parents. He looks forward to giving back to the Asian and LGBTQ+ communities through research and clinical work. Next, we have Lur Sur. Lur is a recent first-generation graduate from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she earned a BS in Health Policy and Management. As a Karen American refugee, her lived experience has fueled a deep commitment to supporting refugee and migrant communities. She has worked with several nonprofit organizations across North Carolina's Triangle region, advocating for these populations as they navigate the challenges of building a new life in the U.S. Lur is passionate about advancing health equity and justice, approaching her work with cultural humility and a focus on sustainable, community-driven collaboration. Next, I'd like to present the Asian American Foundation, or TAF, which is a national nonprofit community committed to serving Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities by promoting equity, visibility, and safety. They invest in initiatives that combat anti-Asian hate, shift harmful narratives, and ensure our communities are better represented in education, media, and policy. One of their major efforts is advancing data and research that accurately reflects the AANHPI experience. That's where the Beyond the Surface study comes in that we're presenting tonight. Beyond the Surface is a comprehensive report released in partnership with AAPI Data and Momentive that uncovers how AANHPI communities are often misrepresented or overlooked. The results show that despite being the fastest growing racial group in the US, AANHPIs are still undercounted in data, underrepresented in leadership, and face rising discrimination. Importantly, the study highlights the diversity within AANHPI communities, challenging the idea that we're a monolith, and calls for more nuanced, community-specific solutions. We're so excited to have the TAF team share their findings with everyone tonight.
UCA WAVES, United Chinese American WAVES, aims to raise awareness of the mental health challenges that young Asian Americans face, particularly those stemming from familial expectations, cultural pressures, and societal influences. Our organization is committed to developing community support systems and accessible resources to improve youth mental health. By promoting cultural sensitivity and psychological well-being and mental health interventions, UCA WAVES ensures that care is both inclusive and effective. Additionally, we encourage civic engagement and advocacy in shaping public policies that address mental health issues impacting the Asian American community. While tonight's webinar will be focusing on AANHPI youth, some of these statistics are also important to be aware of as they relate to adults as well. These statistics are from a recent UCLA Center for Health Policy research report from last year that can be accessed at this QR code. But as you can see, 1 in 4 Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, as well as 1 in 6 Asian American adults, report a need for mental health support despite significant mental health stressors, suggesting an underutilization of mental health resources. Nearly half of NHPI and AA adults report everyday experiences with discrimination, and 20% of Asian American adults also report experience as a victim of a hate incident or crime. Nearly half of AA and HPI adults are worried about being a victim of gun violence. 21% of NHPI and 12% of Asian American adults report suicidal ideation. And when AA and HPI adults do seek support, they encounter significant access barriers. And of course, tonight's webinar will be focusing on youth. This is just one snippet of one page of the Beyond the Surface report from TAF, and you can access the full report at this QR code. So without further ado, I will hand this over to Shruti, Director of Data and Research at the Asian American Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for setting the context. That was great, so thank you so much. And thank you all for this opportunity to share the findings from our study with all of you. It's really an honor and a privilege to be with all of you here today. So as Peggy mentioned, as part of TAF's data and research work, we knew that there was a big gap in terms of disaggregated data, especially for our communities and about our young people, specific to mental health. And so I'll say a little bit about why we did this study, who we did it with, what we found, what might be causing that, and then some ideas on how we could address. So I'll start with our why. As we all know, our community has been largely left out of the conversation. We've been left out of many conversations, but especially on the conversation on mental health in America. And as a result, we do not have reliable disaggregated data on the status of mental health of our young people today. But also, as was mentioned, suicide is a leading cause of death amongst Asian American youth. This is from CDC data. And also the second leading cause of death amongst NHPI youth aged 15 to 24. Given those startling numbers, we at TAF wanted to address this data gap by releasing one of the most comprehensive, national surveys on ANHPI youth mental health. And so through this survey, we are hoping to bring awareness to this issue, spark new conversations like this one, and invite partners and funders to address the status quo. To make sure that our study is rigorous and high quality, and useful to all of our stakeholders, we worked closely with a group of top academics, community leaders, and youth advisors. We're so grateful to this community of experts who have supported us through this process. Our very own Lily Chen, the founding director of UCA Waves, was an integral member of our community advisory committee. And so Lily, we're so grateful to you for all of your thoughtful guidance and expertise and all of the time that you've invested in making the study useful and accessible. I think I also saw in the chat that Carolyn Lee might be here. So thank you, Carolyn, for joining us tonight, but also thank you for all of the time that you have put into the study and all of your guidance. We're very grateful to all of you. So very quickly, this is about the methodology. This is a mixed method study. We started with a qualitative research phase where we planned 5 different focus groups with East Asian, Filipino, South Asian, Southeast Asian, and LGBTQ youth aged 14 to 18. We worked with a firm called Child Trends to develop a pre-focus group questionnaire to gather their thoughts on young people's thoughts on mental health indicators. And then we also recruited youth researchers to help conduct the focus groups themselves. And they also were involved in analyzing and reporting out the data. And we used the findings from the focus group to inform the survey. The survey itself consists of 1,400 odd respondents, all ANHPI, age 14 to 25. We collaborated with BSP Research to conduct this online survey through a panel back in August 2024. The report was released in December of last year. And this data is nationally representative with the ability to disaggregate for main subgroups. We also oversampled for NHPIs, and we weighted the data based on ethnic group, ethnic origin, gender, age, state, parent education, and parent nativity. Our results are valid with a margin of error of plus or minus 2.5%. We went through an ethics review process for both phases of the study. But as you review the findings, please keep in mind that there are, of course, some limitations that come with our work. We have a heavy representation of ANHPIs with a college education degree or more. The study was also done only in English and was online only. We also needed parental consent for the 14 to 17-year-olds, so that may have resulted in some biases as well. So quick overview of the main findings. One of our main findings from this work is that while most ANHPI youths say their overall mental health is fine, their responses to more specific questions may reveal some hidden struggles. So when we asked our respondents about their mental health and emotional well-being, nearly 7 in 10 described it as good or excellent. But then we asked specifically about experiences with depression and suicidality. We used the PHQ-9, the Patient Health Questionnaire 9, a self-administered screening tool that's used to assess and monitor depression. This consists of 9 questions. It asks about things like mood, sleep, energy levels, and thoughts of self-harm. And what we found was that almost half of ANHPI people, young people, scored above the threshold for moderate depression. And just for context, a score of moderate or above, that's 10 or more, typically warrants a treatment plan, counseling, and or pharmacotherapy. And it's really startling that almost half of ANHPI young people scored above the threshold. And while this rate by itself is concerning, it's even higher for certain groups like Pacific Islanders, for LGBTQ young people, for those who identify as female, 18 to 25-year-olds, rather as compared to 14 to 17-year-olds, first generation youth, those enrolled in 2-year vocational, technical programs, or those who have whose parents have lower levels of education. When we asked specifically about psychosomatic symptoms related to sleep and energy, we found that the majority of young people reported feeling tired or having little energy, and also reported feeling having trouble falling or staying asleep or sleeping too much. And so we actually noticed that ANHPI young people tend to respond better to questions around sleep and energy. So those might be some things we might want to keep in mind as we interact with our young people. When we asked about suicidality, we found that 3 in 10 young people, young ANHPIs, reported having planned or attempted suicide in their lifetime. And this was a question that we adopted from the SBQR, which is the Suicide Behaviors Questionnaire. It's widely used in clinical settings, in research studies and public health surveys, mainly to assess suicide risk, especially amongst youth and at-risk populations. I want to note that this rate of suicidal ideation in our study is actually higher than what we have found in some of the other studies, other literature on this topic, which have also used the same scale, the SBQR. And as we can imagine, the numbers are even higher for certain groups. So LGBTQ plus youth, especially at risk. Again, females, those who are multiracial are more likely to have thought about suicide. Age could also be a factor. We saw that, rates almost double when you compare the youngest demographic, the 14 to 17-year-olds, to the 18 to 25-year-olds. So what could be driving some of this? The biggest stressor on mental health is the pressure, both that young people feel, both from themselves and from their family, to succeed. And racial and ethnic experiences also play a big role. We saw that 43% of youth identified self-pressure to succeed academically or professionally as having a very or extremely negative impact on their mental health. 39% also said that a sense of duty towards family or causing them shame, and 36% said pressure from parents also impacted them negatively. For a lot of young people, especially ANHPI young women, the pressure to look or dress in a particular way can be, or what is thought of as attractive, can also have impact on one's mental or emotional health. And so this is from our focus group work, where we saw that 34% of young people said body image issues actually affect them very or extremely negatively as compared to men. You can see some quotes from our focus groups here. I'd like to point to one particular one from our East Asian focus group, where there was a young person who said that the comparison is not just with Western standards, but also a comparison between subgroups themselves. And when I say subgroups, I mean between East Asians, South Asians, Southeast Asians. The other key stressor is when hearing about anti-Asian incidents, or seeing or hearing negative comments about one's race or ethnicity, stereotypes or jokes about race and ethnicity, microaggressions, all cause a sense of not feeling like they belong because of their race or ethnicity, and all of this also impacts young people's mental health negatively. It's also interesting that 18 to 25-year-olds are more likely to be affected by these factors as compared to 14 to 17-year-olds. And, if we have time, would love to think about, what are the ways parents can play a role, especially 14 to 17-year-olds more likely to be at home with parents, with family. So what role can family play in protecting and preparing young people as they move into adulthood? But how many people actually experience these kinds of race-based discrimination? So we asked young people about prevalence, and it is really startling to see that 93% of ANHPI young people have experienced some form of race-based discrimination just in the past year. A lot of them, almost half had experienced having their ethnicity confused with another. 45% had heard someone make a joke about their race or ethnicity. Over 1 in 5 had explicitly racist language directed at them. And the common kinds of microaggressions that people have experienced also looks different for different subgroups. So for instance, for East Asian youth, the common experience is more around, making a joke about their race or ethnicity, whereas for, say, a group like Southeast Asians, it's about confusing their ethnicity with another group. For South Asians, it's about, struggling or mispronouncing one's name. So it's very interesting to see the different ways that our young people are being impacted by these microaggressions. And we also asked a question which was around, how do they identify with their ethnicity and race? We used a scale called the ethnic identity scale. This is used, it has different components of racial ethnic identity, and young people respond to these statements. We actually found that 1 in 5 young people wish they were of a different ethnicity. And so just given all of those statistics, what can we, who are young people turning to? And so what we found is that some young people turn to parents when wanting to seek help. Others may feel that there are barriers. Over half report feeling comfortable talking to their parents when having a tough time emotionally or mentally. But if we dig deeper, we see that these rates are widely vary when we look at ethnic subgroups. So for instance, South Asians show the highest level of comfort, while Southeast Asians were the least comfortable approaching parents or caregivers for support. And only a third of LGBTQ+ youth felt comfortable speaking to their parents about their emotional or mental health, and that was the lowest rate of any demographic that we tracked. When we asked why they may feel hesitant or what barriers they feel when talking to parents, the majority felt that they did not want to burden their parents, and also felt that, parents may have different beliefs about what mental health is, what mental health needs are. Some of the other reasons that were also that rose to the top is that parents may prioritize other things over mental health, and also the feeling of shame, feeling of embarrassment was another factor. But interestingly, we did a separate study called the Status Index, which is the social tracking of Asian Americans in the United States. It's about how Asian Americans are perceived. And as part of that study, we surveyed Asian American, Black, Hispanic, and white parents so we provided 2 scenarios. One was on depression, the other was on anxiety. And we asked them, if this were happening to your child, how would you react? And what we actually saw was that Asian Americans were indeed concerned about their child's mental health. Most parents, Asian American parents, reacted with concern, especially to the depression vignette. Over 1/3 of parents said that they would consult a physician if they saw specific symptoms that we had outlined in the scenario, the depression scenario. So this shows us that, parents really, and look at all of you here, right? There are 89 folks here. I know a lot of you are parents. You've tuned in on a weekday night to listen into this webinar. And clearly that shows the level of interest that we as parents have for our young people's mental health. We also asked young people who scored above the threshold for moderate depression about whether they have sought help from a mental health professional. More than 1 in 4 at-risk ANHPI youth have never spoken to a professional about their mental health. And just to recollect, usually if folks are scoring above the threshold for moderate depression on the PHQ-9, there is a treatment plan, counseling, some sort of follow-up or pharmacotherapy. And again, it's startling to see that more than 1 in 4 have never spoken with a professional about their mental health. Again, we see that some groups are more at risk than others. Southeast Asians were least likely to have received professional support. Young women, again, another at-risk group. And young people whose families have been in the US for longer, so third generation or more, were much more likely to say that they've never received professional support in the last year as compared to those with more recent immigrant backgrounds. So who are young people turning to? We found that 61% of ANHPI young people said they would turn to a friend. That's almost twice the rate of those who said a significant other, a boyfriend, girlfriend, and more than twice the rate of those who said mental health professional. Just to note that we did not ask specifically about parents in this question, so that's something to keep in mind. So to change the status quo, what should we do? We need to meet young people where they are. And where are they learning about mental health? A lot of young people rely on social media, on friends and schools for information about mental health. But it is different for teens who live at home. So for 14 to 17-year-olds, parents really are the main source of information about emotional and mental health, followed by social media and then school. And then we also asked young people to select from a list of possible solutions to address mental health concerns. There was most interest in a community wellness space and digital self-help tools. Of course, this doesn't mean that facilitating access to professionals, parents, caregivers is not important. In fact, a third of ANHPI youth want more accessible, culturally knowledgeable mental health professionals or parent and caregiver training programs. And so that brings me to my last slide, which is around recommendations. As we can clearly see from our study, there are several needs that have come up as part of this study. But this is just, it's beyond the surface, but it's really scratching the surface in some ways. I think there continues to be a huge research and a funding gap. And so we need more ANHPI youth researchers. We also need more research on that includes ANHPI youth, especially around mental health. We also need to take a more systems approach, so not just attending to the problems at hand, but thinking about what might be causing some of this. So looking at, what are the root causes of these stressors? So is it, can we do more around education? What does microaggressions look like for ANHPI youth? How can we educate others about that? And, if it's career-related stress, like, can we provide some sort of guidance for young people and their parents as they seek to make some of these decisions together? We also think we also think it's important to tailor solutions. We saw that several groups were specifically at risk: LGBTQ plus youth, NHPI youth, first and second generation young people, and the older 18 to 25 youth as well. So how can we think about solutions that are tailored to the needs of our at-risk communities? We also saw that there is quite a lot of information that is coming through social media for our young people. And so how can we work so that, social media is not all negative? And how can we have a more open conversation with young people about how they're using social media? And then parents, of course, we need to treat them as an essential part of the puzzle, bring them into the conversation. And I think we need to start from a place of understanding that recognizes that, as parents, we ourselves bring our baggage. We may be bringing our beliefs to the table. And so, how can we recognize some of those structural challenges that we ourselves as parents might face? And how can we move away from stigmatizing that, but rather try and have more open conversations? And lastly, obviously peers play a big role. So how can we equip young people to support other young people with the tools that they would need when, our young people are facing mental health challenges? I'll stop there. and welcome, maybe I'll pass it back to Justin to take us through the rest of the session.
Thank you so much, Shruti. What an incredible presentation, so beautifully presented and clear, and really, as everyone has said, powerful data. And I appreciate what you said about we have nearly 100 folks here on this call late at night on the East Coast. So it shows how important this topic is, and we really appreciate you all joining us. So again, for those who missed the beginning, I'm Justin Chen. I'm a psychiatrist and a physician administrative leader in New York City. And we have an A+ panel here for us to kind of talk through these results with you all. So we introduced everyone at the beginning, but I'm going to have them reintroduce themselves maybe in a little more personal way, starting with you, Phineas. Could you tell us briefly about your personal and professional background and how you yourself got interested in this topic of AAPI youth mental health?
Yeah, thank you, Justin. So professionally speaking, I am a third year, actually rising fourth year counseling psychology PhD student at Arizona State University. Particularly interested in studying the intersectionality of racial ethnic identities and gender identities. So personally speaking, I am an international student. I'm originally from Hong Kong and I came to the US when I was 15 years old. And that is really where I got interested in mental health, because coming from Hong Kong, where the society is very much hush hush on mental health issues, and there's like immense pressure in terms of like, oh, you have to go through all these schooling to succeed. You have to like just put all of your energy into schooling and exams and whatnot. There is a high rate of depression and unfortunately suicidality that is associated with the society. Coming to the US, I was assuming that like that might not be the case. However, something that I really came across was that the acculturation stress, right? Like that I have to assimilate myself into American culture, that I have to, like, I speak perfect English, but the culture and even like navigating the racial dynamics, that is something that I've never really like expected or even like were taught or even were prepared back in Hong Kong. And so um definitely had like a very hard time having to figure that out by myself, because my parents had no idea what I have to go through. At the same time, that was around the time where I started to come to understanding of my own sexual orientation, gender identity, and that in itself is another hurdle that I have to navigate as well. And so seeing how myself like have to struggle through this mental health crisis, and also seeing how my peers have to struggle through the mental health crisis as well, really sparked my interest in being able to look more into the issue, right? And look more into the nuances of not only how I myself or my peers navigate through my identities, but how I can communicate this back to my parents, back to where I come from, back to my community, right? To be able to foster some sort of like communication and foster some sort of support.
Thank you, Phineas. I have heard your story before, but I'm always so inspired by how you've sort of taken your own journey and your love for your family and community and try to advocate and give back. So I'll ask the same question to you, Lur. Tell us about your personal and professional background and then why you're interested in AAPI mental health.
Yeah, so I am a first gen Korean American, and it is an ethnicity that not many people are very much aware of. And so I think I just want to say, like, first of all, it is very much a privilege that I am getting to speak on this panel. And I think even as we were preparing, I was told that I was the youngest on this panel. And so I think that's even a big privilege that like I am in a generation where this conversation is being had, because as a first gen Asian American, with parents who don't really speak English / are still learning the culture and societal values of America, I've had to navigate a lot of just growing up in two different cultures, and then started college in 2020 and again, just really privileged that like that was when like the conversations around mental health started happening. And I feel like if I was in college at that point, and if it weren't for social media and just like the conversations that we were having now, I would still be very much in the loss about just mental health and what that actually means. And obviously, like there's still a lot of stigma that like different communities carry around it. And so I think just like again, like it's awesome that like we are having this conversation, and it's like generations prior to me that are kind of leading the way, but also encouraging my generation, the generation like after me, to like continue to have these conversations. And so personally, like just have been navigating different realms of just conversations around mental health, and also experiences with um mental health providers, and then also just getting to reflect on my own community here in Raleigh, North Carolina, of Karen refugees that have been resettled to this city where things are very foreign and are trying to navigate life here for the first time. And so my interest really stems from just having those conversations with the community, seeing that there's a big gap in terms of how my generation is navigating mental health and how that is being communicated to the generation previous to us. And so, yeah, so super thankful to get to be on this panel and just continue to have these conversations.
Thank you, Laura. You may be the youngest, but I think you definitely have a lot to contribute here. So thank you for being with us. And lastly, Shruti, last but not least, if you could answer the same question.
Sure. Thank you, Justin. I don't think I can be as eloquent as our young people here today, but I can try. I'm a first generation. I was born and raised in India, moved to the US a few years ago. And I think I've worked mainly in public health, especially in reproductive health and justice. And started working on experiences with reproductive health for ANHPIs. And that's when I also became a parent. And I think I kind of started to realize that the US is, home for my child. And then I started sort of coming to terms with the fact that the US is also home for me. And so I think I look back and think about sort of, the privilege of being able to work at an organization like TAF and focus on an issue that is so important to our community. But also, I think I started thinking about, for my child, what would the world look like, right? Like when she's a young person. I have now two daughters, but will they feel the sense of, lack of belonging and acceptance that I'm seeing in the data? Will I see that with my own children? And it's funny because just today my daughter she's three and a half. But she was telling me how there was another child who was, pushing her in the playground. She's complained about this child before. But as I can see, these things are starting to come up already. And so what can I really do to equip myself as a parent, move away from like the data and research, but to think about what does this mean for like my everyday life, my family, my children, right? And so I think that's what really draws me to this work. And it feels really personal that way.
Thank you for sharing that. I think listening to you, especially as a parent, I think many of our participants in the audience are parents as well. And I know both as a professional, mental health professional, and also as a member of the community, as a second generation Asian American, I resonate with what people were saying about lack of awareness. I think there may be often a feeling, there may be stigma, but also just lack of awareness, and maybe a fear almost that by talking about mental health, we might weaken our kids or normalize these issues, or somehow they, something that might not be a problem will become more of a problem. And in fact, what we're hearing is it's a little bit the opposite, that, if you don't acknowledge the issue, it doesn't make it go away. And if anything, I think what we hear is that the younger generation just feels alone with it, when in fact, we saw in the data that parents are actually an incredibly important support. So, and then just moving to the report, I just have to say, having not been a part of this report at all, I just am really floored by how important this type of work is. And it really speaks to the power of a funding organization like TAF to convene the right expertise from researchers, from the community, to do a proper study with the right scales that are validated to try to understand so that we now have this data, which we can then try to interpret. But without the data, it's very hard to know. I remember when we started doing talks about Asian American mental health early on, a lot of times we heard from parents, well, it can't be that bad. I don't think our kids are, any more at risk. But now that we're studying this, we see the impacts of racism, of racialized experiences, of identity issues, cultural issues. So now we can discuss it. So let's turn to the report. And maybe we can go in reverse order. I'll start with you, Shruti, and then go backwards. What findings from this report jumped out at you the most, you in particular, and why?
Yeah, I think the one that feels sort of closest to home is that piece about parents and the role that families play, right? So there's a lot of the pressure is both from self, but also from family. That feeling of, not wanting to burden one's parents, the feeling of not wanting to, like feeling shame or embarrassment around that felt really close to home in two ways. I mean, obviously, I think, reflecting on my own personal experience and thinking about how comfortable I would be talking about mental health with my parents, but also thinking about, what kind of parent do I want to be and how can I create a safe space for my children to be able to talk to me about their mental health. So I think that's really, the parent piece is really what struck me.
Great. And Lur, can I ask you the same question? What jumped out at you from this
Mhm.
report?
This the other bit also in regards to just parent and like child relationship, the bit about more than, I know it's like 2% more, but like more than 50% of AAPI youth feel comfortable like talking with their parents about these mental health struggles. That was surprising to me because maybe I'm just experiencing this firsthand as a first gen also like youth. But like that is something that like when then it goes into like the barriers that like children feel and like how feeling like a burden is one of them. And so I am shocked, but also encouraged that there are families and individuals who are having those conversations with their parents. In fact, when we go into what we'll talk about later, I just feel like there's always that like I don't know, like that parent-child relationship is like a very hard dynamic. So I am very surprised that it's more than 50% because I was expecting it to be a lot lower. But I'm also encouraged that those conversations are being had in the household.
Thank you. That's right. We're often stereotyped as not talking about these things, but I think things are changing. And we know parents love their kids. It's more about knowledge and understanding. So, Phineas, we'll turn to you. Same question.
Actually, I listed out two. One is that like we are seeing a discrepancy in terms of like a subjective report of mental health versus an objective report of mental health using PHQ-9, and that is starking like that really like is starking. In regards to why is that the case? That is really the first question that came to my mind. Is it because of mental health stigma that is still very much present in the community, or is it kind of tying to the other results that we found in this study that like youth is still very much care about their family, that they don't want to bring shame or they don't want to lose face as a family unit, or they receive some sort of messages that from their families that like mental health is something that we don't talk about, that kind of altered their way of thinking that like, oh, I just have to be okay with my mental health. And that really needs to need of like providing more psychoeducation on that matter, right? Like having mental health issues is the same as having a physical health issue, right? Like it is very much integral part of our body. The second part that I have is the high percentage of discrimination microaggressions that we're seeing, AAPI NH youth experiencing, right? And as well as them having to balance some sort of acculturation expectation as well. I would be wondering, who can they turn to help, right? Instead of parents who sometimes might have this generational gap or like, communication gap that they're experiencing. If we can develop some sort of intervention, maybe with peers, maybe with schools, like can we effectively address that issue in regards to not only experiencing discrimination based on their racial ethnic identities, but also with other intersecting identities that they are holding.
That first data point that you mentioned also jumped out at me, because it's shown time and again from the data that AA and HPI young people are not coming to attention. They don't self-identify as having a problem. They don't have a diagnosis. And yet when you ask specifically about symptoms from data that you and I analyzed actually for college students, right? We found that AA and HPI were about half as likely to carry a mental health diagnosis, but almost 40% more likely to have attempted suicide. So for me as a clinician, this is very alarming. It's a group that, again, is trying to put forward a very positive face, but maybe suffering in silence, is suffering in silence. And the other thing I know as a clinician that the parents in the audience should recognize is that people can get better. And people do get better. So it's really not like this is something that is, sort of an unaddressable issue. Actually, mental health interventions are very successful. And it's the folks who don't come to attention that end up having a worse trajectory. So it's more about sort of creating a space where we can share about the issue and then address it. And so let's move to the last question, and then we're going to also answer some of the questions that came in through the Q&A. So I'll start with you, Lur, this time, and then we'll mix up the order. What do you think should be the next steps based on this data? What should we do? And you can address this from the perspective of parents, community, researchers, youth, whatever, policymakers. But what do you think are the next steps? How do we address this problem?
Yeah, and I think from just one step might be is that I think just talking a lot about like the parent youth relationship of just how can we cultivate one spaces / conversations to just not only increase awareness but also to like actually kind of just help guide those conversations well, kind of just like almost like breaking a generational like trauma, but like to not just go at it alone for like the future generations, but also to invite like the previous generation in, and like how do we create spaces and just conversations well so that we can just invite both parents and children in, and supporting like the youth mental health in the AAPI community.
Thank you. Phineas?
Larry kind of read my mind. That was exactly what I was going to say as well. I do think this is a very important part too. Oftentimes, there's this expectation between both ends, right? Parents hoping the kids doing all the work of like, connecting with them. And there's also the kids like hoping the parents to like, fully like, hey, you have to understand where I'm coming from. I believe that this is actually a gap or a bridge that needs to be built from both ends. Oftentimes, as you recall the data where we actually see that parents do care about mental health. However, the way that they show support might not be the way that the kids are looking for, right? And I think that is an important thing to highlight as a researcher and also as a clinician, that how are some ways that we can actually let the both sides know their needs, and also that, hey, there's actually actions being taken, and to start that conversation there. Another point that I really want to, call for action is for private donors or even like organizations to fund research specifically for Asian Americans, and also for any other intersecting identities, like for example Asian American sexual and gender minorities, given how funding is already scarce in the first place, and now with the funding cuts or whatnot, it would really be appreciated if these foundations can step up and fund those research for us to have like a better understanding of the nuances within this community that has always been overlooked.
For sure, right? The AA and HPI LGBTQ plus community, double minority, much higher. We saw that it's a much higher rate of mental health problems, and not, genetically or anything like that, because it's because of this double kind of minoritization. And to your first point, are you aware of any resources or research being done to break down these communication barriers between parents and kids?
Not that I have on top of my head. I do know there are a couple of research that is ongoing right now, that is looking into the issue. I don't believe any papers have been published, but hopefully so, and hopefully soon. Myself, I'm also doing research on that front as well, more so looking into how parent and kids of LGBTQ Asian American identities are making those communications, and to really much understand that like there are very much different ways of communicating parental acceptance and parental support as two different like concepts. One is more so ideology, right, with the acceptance piece, and the support is more so the behavioral piece.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but seems like that'll be a very important thing to fund. Hopefully, we can get funding to do that important work. And lastly, Shruti, same question for you. What are the next steps from the data?
I think I would sort of wear two hats for this question. So the first hat from, speaking as a member of TAF, I think one of the reasons we did this study is to be able to spark these kinds of conversations. So I actually invite all of you to share suggestions and recommendations about how we can get this study out more and use it as a tool for advocacy, use it as a tool for making more funding requests, use it in as many different ways as possible, but would really want this to reach our community and reach our different stakeholders. So, I think the question, I'm putting it, sort of turning it back to everyone here. The second hat is more from that of a parent. And I think, I love what Lair and Phineas have said. I think for me, I'm thinking about like, how can we create, or what is the language that, parents can use that would, that can reach young people and that feels like, providing, like responding in the way that young people would like, or that would help them feel seen. So I think, again, would love to work with, clinicians in the room and others to think about how can we equip parents to give them the language that they would need to be able to have these conversations, and how can we start that as young as possible, when the kids are as young as possible.
Great. Thank you all for your responses. I do want to turn to the Q&A from the audience in our last 8 minutes. There have been some great questions that I think would bear answering live. And for the first one, there was a question about any recommendations on how we actually can alleviate the pressure to succeed for youth that was identified as maybe the top stressor for both age groups. Anyone can answer, including the moderators. It doesn't have to just be panelists. That's a great question. Yeah, go ahead.
I agree. It's a great question. We were like flagging it at the back end here. I was like, let's ask this. I responded in the Q&A. I do believe like coming from like a counseling psychology background is to really like initiate the conversation of like how do both ends of the family unit, right, the parent and the kid, define success, right? Oftentimes in a very traditional Asian lens, success equals to having great schooling, earning like high salary, like getting a very steady job, and then being able to support your family and so on and so forth. With how technology and with how like the US societal context is, like that definition might very much be different when it comes to younger generations, and there is where the tensions would start to come up. And so being able to hold that space and allow both sides of the family unit to come together and like explore what does success mean, right, and what does it mean to be able to achieve that in its own way, could help alleviate that stress as a starting step.
Any other thoughts? How do we reduce this pressure? If not, I'll just add, I remember giving a talk in Maryland for some parents, and the immediate response about this topic was, well, you want our kids to just be like C average students, don't care about anything. And it was interesting, first of all, because it was like, okay, that's kind of like a black or white response. It's either you're perfect or you're C. But also, it was interesting because I was like, I actually think that a lot of the literature shows that some of the more adaptive parenting is actually high challenge, but also high support. So it's not that we have to lose expectations for our kids. I think, sort of having a desire to achieve is not necessarily a bad thing. But if it's not matched with this sense that you can go to your parents, right, or that there's an ability to share about challenges, I think that's when you start to see some of these mental health concerns emerge. So I think all of this is reinforcing the need to have how important the family is actually to provide this sense of safety and support, and that we can overcome challenges, that they don't have to be the end of the road. There are a number of questions in the chat about, or in the Q&A actually, about sort of methodology of the study. So I wonder if Shruti, if you might be able to
Sure.
respond. Do you want
Yeah.
to read them, or do you want to read them again?
No, I can go through them really quickly.
Sure.
So I think there was one question about any insight on how study results vary in communities where Asian populations are higher versus lower. I think that's a great question. We did weight the data by region. I'm looking at the split, and even though we had a good sort of distribution, it's not something that emerged sort of as a significant factor. Although I can imagine that, I know that we did hear in the focus groups that seeing other people who look like themselves, in schools and in other public spaces definitely did help young people. Unfortunately, it's not something that our data really captured. The second question is around among the kids who are surveyed, do you know how many of the parents are first generation versus second, third? Asking the question because I'm wondering if mental health challenges would be different based on parents' background and experience living in the US. Again, great question. We saw that about a quarter were first and 1.5 generation, another quarter, third or more. Most of them, 42%, second generation, and we had about 5% who were adopted. Now, I think there were a few things that I had noted as I was presenting, where we did see that having parents with, being first or second generation, etc., can have an impact. We did see that, it was interesting. I thought that, third generation or more are more likely to not seek help from professionals as compared to first generation, which I think could be really interesting to explore further and see if that resonates with other findings in the literature. But I'm sure there are other differences that that we have captured in the report. And then let me see how much, another question, how much of any conversations do ANHPI youth have with their peers about their feelings and challenges? I know one of the statistics showed that the youth turn to their friends, but at what depth is this discussion? I don't think that's something I can speak to from the study, but maybe, I don't know if I can put any of our other panelists in a spot, but maybe I'll turn it to you, Justin.
Yeah, no, we can open that up to the group. From your experience, right? Are young people talking to their friends about this, even if they don't talk to their parents? It sounded like in the study they said, yes, that was the number one resource they would turn to, right? What do you all think? I guess it's a little hard to generalize because, I don't know that that was studied, as you say, in depth, but it was reassuring to me to see that many people said they would talk to friends. They're not feeling totally alone with it. But again, if there's concerns about stigma or face and shaming your parents, I can imagine it may be challenging. Just to go back to what you were saying as well, about the generational differences. There's a huge literature about, acculturation and mental health. And just to make sure we're using the same terminology, I think of first generation as the immigrant generation, so the first generation in this country. So the majority of the people in this study, the young people, were second generation, meaning they're children of immigrants like myself. And we know there's something called the immigrant paradox, where actually first generation, the people who move to this country tend to actually have better health, both physical and mental. And it may be because it takes extra strength to move to, it's a big move and it's a decision one makes. And it's often the second generation where you see the most challenges, because this is a generation that didn't choose to move here, but then is confronting all of the cultural and identity issues. including sort of maybe having conflicts about who one is. The first generation kind of knows where they came from, and the second generation lacks that. We also know that cultural identity is protective, that having a strong sense of connection to one's culture can actually protect against mental health problems. So these are all things that we should be studying and learning how to address. So I want to be respectful of time. We're exactly at 9 o'clock Eastern. There were many questions in the chat about whether the recording and slides are available, and I think we've shared the link to the report. I think the recording will be available. Thank you also, Dr. Zixing Wang, who shared a YouTube video resource about communication. Any last thoughts from any of our panelists before we end, or the Peggy or Jennifer to wrap us up?
Sure thing. Just a couple of slides to end, and thank you all so much for coming. There are 2 QR codes here for more resources, both from UCA Waves as well as TAF. And I'm sure we can put that in the chat for folks as well. And a huge thank you to TAF. It's really been such a wonderful experience working with you all and hearing from about this amazing report. And thank you so much to our technical team, Laura Wu and Alan Zhong, for making this webinar happen, and to our chat monitors, Ling and Warren. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. And of course, to the panelists and Dr. Chen. And please do follow us on social media. We're posting events, resources. We'd love to stay engaged with all of you. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful night.
Good night, everyone.